tenemos con nosotros un invitado muy especial que viene desde Estados Unidos, el doctor Tom Palmer. Tom Palmer es el vicepresidente ejecutivo de la red mundial Atlas y es el encargado de programas internacionales. Trabaja con proyectos en más de 14 idiomas y por eso pues, se está pasando la mitad del tiempo de un año viajando por medio mundo. Además, Tom es director de la Universidad del Cato Institute, una institución de gran prestigio en Estados Unidos, de orientación libertaria y que defiende toda la libertad, tanto política, civil y económica. Es además el vicepresidente de Estudios Humanos de la George Mason University. Como os comentaba, Tom es un intrépido viajero, se recorre varios continentes en pocas semanas para hablar de ciencia política, de sociedad civil, de ética, de marco jurídico, de opción pública, de derechos individuales, de las personas, de historia. Tiene un gran sentido del humor, le gustan mucho los juegos de palabras. Es además doctor en Ciencias Políticas por la Universidad de Oxford y máster en Filosofía por la Universidad Católica de América. Ha escrito y sigue escribiendo muchísimo en diferentes medios de comunicación, en el Wall Street Journal, en New York Times, Die Welt, Keixing, Al Hayat, Washington Post, The Spectator of London. Además es autor de Realizing Freedom, Libertarian Theory, History and Practice, dándonos cuenta de la libertad, una teoría libertaria, historia y práctica. Y es editor de La moralidad del capitalismo, después del estado del bienestar, porque la libertad, de paz, amor y libertad, y mi favorito, self-control or state control, es decir, autocontrol o controlados en manos del Estado, donde aborda algo esencial. No hay colectivismo bueno ni malo. No existe tal cosa como que el colectivismo de izquierdas es mejor que el de derechas o viceversa. Ambos son igual de malos porque amenazan la libertad humana, destruyen los proyectos vitales de las personas, alejando la capacidad de cada uno de nosotros de tomar nuestras propias decisiones. Decisiones que nos impulsan a tener capacidad de éxito, de fracaso, pero siempre sabemos que los seres humanos, como lo explicaba antes Isabel, aprendemos de los aciertos y de los errores. Y nos movemos. Así que muchísimas gracias, Tom. Thank you very much for being here with us and sharing all your wise thoughts and your knowledge on human liberty.
Well, thank you
have the floor.
very, very much for the opportunity. I apologize for not speaking in Spanish, but my mind does not work fast enough to speak as fast as Spaniards can speak. So I'm a little bit slower. One of the things that was striking in the last presentation was the role that libertarians have played in the struggle. And I will emphasize that the socialists were the latecomers to the party and acted very opportunistically and with no principle whatsoever in this struggle and this debate. I was on the platform committee that wrote the 1976 platform of the Libertarian Party that was referenced, and it's a topic I've been involved in for many years. But this occasion is in commemoration of a very important activity. People fought back against violence. People who only wanted to live in peace and weren't harming anybody. They demanded only that violence and injustice and oppression not be visited upon them. And the victims of state violence, or as the police called them, the queers and fairies and dykes and lessies, trannies and perverts, these are the terms that were used by the police. They stood up as human beings whose rights had been trampled without consequence, whose lives had been held to be of no intrinsic value by the state, and who had been forced to hide, to dissemble, and to become invisible. And on that important evening, they said, no more. No more hiding, no more dissembling, no more invisibility, no more violence, no more injustice, and no more oppression. I took the title for this talk Adam Smith and the Obvious and Simple System of LGBTQ Liberty, from a thinker who was both deeply radical and also cautiously reformist. A thinker who is known to have been a mild-mannered person and tolerant and humane and liberal. Adam Smith was someone who understood the need to dissemble about his own life. And he had very good reason at the time for doing so because of his views on religion and possibly other matters as well. And I won't speculate on the sexuality of this lifelong bachelor because there's no evidence at all of which I'm aware to draw any conclusions about his personal life. But he did know something about hiding and being invisible. He delayed until after his death the publication of his writings on religion, the skeptical unorthodoxy of which would have caused him very substantial trouble, probably loss of his teaching job, and conceivably criminal prosecution. Moreover, the letter that he published upon the death of the man he called his dearest friend, David Hume, also occasioned some scandal, because Smith had described the peaceful death of his friend, the notoriously skeptical and non-religious Hume, who evidently died as cheerfully as he lived. And he wrote regarding his remembrance, he said, "Upon the whole, I have always considered him, both in his lifetime and since his death, as approaching as nearly to the idea of a perfectly wise and virtuous man as perhaps the nature of human frailty will permit." Now, the more famous of Smith's two books, The Wealth of Nations, is focused primarily on human activity in regards to the creation of economic prosperity, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. But the general conclusions about the legitimate extent and limits of coercive power he reached applied very clearly to the lives of LGBT people. He noted, quote, "All systems," notice all, very categorical statement, "all systems of preference or of restraint, therefore, being thus completely taken away, the obvious and simple system of natural liberty establishes itself of its own accord. Every man," and here English unfortunately uses man for human being, but every human being is the sense, "as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest, his own way, and to bring both his industry and capital into competition with those of any other man or order of men. The sovereign is completely discharged from a duty in the attempting to perform which he must always be exposed to innumerable delusions, and for the proper performance of which no human wisdom or knowledge could ever be sufficient." This applies to personal life just as well as it does to economic life. The duty of superintending the industry of private people and of directing it towards the employments most suitable to the interests of the society. He argued that there are only three legitimate functions for the sovereign, or the state. According to the system of natural liberty, the sovereign has only three duties to attend to. Three duties of great importance indeed, but plain and intelligible to common understandings. First, the duty of protecting the society from the violence and invasion of other independent societies. Secondly, the duty of protecting, as far as possible, every member of the society, note, every member of the society, from the injustice or oppression of every other member of it, or the duty of establishing an exact administration of justice. And thirdly, the duty of erecting and maintaining certain public works and certain public institutions. And I'll merely summarize his point. He thought there would be some things, roads and so on, that could not be provided through voluntary subscription, and maybe the state should provide those. There was no role in his description of the function of the sovereign for persecution of anybody or for the imposition of any grand vision on the entire society. The system of justice should be limited to, and quote, protecting as far as possible every member of the society from the injustice or oppression of every other member of it, giving it no scope for prosecution of alleged crimes without victims. Indeed, it's clear from his writings that the state, by persecuting people who do not harm others, is itself engaging in a criminal activity. So the function of the state is not to make us all conform to what some ruler or group may consider to be normal or moral or godly, but it's merely to protect us from injustice and oppression. And that certainly includes the actions of those others who would forcibly enroll us in their own vision of the good or just or godly society. Others who followed on him applied that more clearly to issues of religion, but also sexuality. Classical liberals were early and active campaigners for liberation of LGBT people from oppression and injustice across Europe, in Germany, in Spain, the Netherlands, and France, and many other countries. Moreover, the cultural trends that were unleashed by their advocacy of liberalism and that were sweeping through Europe and America in the 18th and 19th centuries were remarkably favorable to the establishment of independent lives by LGBT people, as many historians have pointed out. And I highly recommend Graham Robb's book, Strangers, Homosexual Love in the 19th Century. Same-sex couples, gender crossers, and likely transgendered men and women were known at the time and were generally not molested by other people. Sometimes considered eccentric or odd. I will add a little note. There are lots of stories about the elderly spinsters, the old ladies who just couldn't find a husband and lived together for 80 years. And this was an accepted part of society. And in the American West, the cowboys who were best friends and lived together for 50 years, which was another well-known part of social life. But we would today call gay bars proliferated in the major cities. Statutory sodomy laws, to the extent that they were enforced at all, were generally applied only to cases of rape or public behavior. In the United States, sodomy laws did not apply to women. That was an interesting point. There were no laws against homosexual behavior by women. And a man could not be convicted of sodomy based on the testimony of a willing participant, referred to as an accomplice. That testimony could not be admitted in the court of law. What that meant was it limited proof to either public behavior, so in front of unwilling witnesses, or involuntary sexual behavior, that is to say, rape, which could be prosecuted quite correctly. In Europe, liberal reformers took many moves to shield people from persecution. In Spain, Jews and sodomites had been vigorously persecuted under the Inquisition. But in 1822, the revision of the Spanish Civil Code eliminated the horror of the death penalty for sodomy and substituted a very bland description of unchaste abuses in the law. And there was much greatly reduced persecution of minorities. Leaving people to live as they please is foundational to a just society. Adam Smith put it very nicely in the Theory of Moral Sentiments. We may often fulfill all the rules of justice by sitting still and doing nothing. Just not hurting other people is to behave in a just manner. Promotion of liberty across the board included sexual minorities. F.A. Hayek in 1959 wrote in the Constitution of Liberty, and I was happy to see that on the presentation, very clear statements on this. He quoted Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell said, "If it were still believed, as it once was, that the toleration of such behavior would expose the community to the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah, the community would have every right to intervene." And Hayek immediately added, But where such factual beliefs do not prevail, private practice among adults, however abhorrent it may be to the majority, is not a proper subject for coercive action for a state whose object is to minimize coercion. Who was it that pioneered the end of the pseudo-scientific psychiatric justifications that socialists and progressives had concocted for persecuting LGBT people? Well, chief among them was the late libertarian psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, someone I had the pleasure of meeting a number of times when he was rather elderly. He campaigned tirelessly against such persecution. Szasz noted coercive measures aimed at reducing diversity of opinion or action, whether in the sexual or the intellectual sphere, are destined to constrict society and thus the human personality. Now here's an area where I want to disagree with the common story told by my friends on the far left. It's a story of constant progression from a state of persecution to liberty. In fact, the liberty of LGBT people has risen and fallen at various times, in various societies, in various cultures. Persecution was waning in the 18th and 19th centuries, which is not the same as to say it was complete liberty and equality. It was not. But the persecution was falling, and then it rose again in the late 19th century and through to the late middle part of the 20th century, reaching different levels in different countries. What changed the trajectory that had been traced by liberalism and led instead to the brutal and savage persecutions of the late 19th century and through into the middle of the 20th century? It actually wasn't the revival of traditional religiosity as it is sometimes portrayed. That's not the case. Although that conservative religiosity did play a role in countries such as Spain when Franco and others came to power. What was it that was the trigger for the change? It was collectivism, socialism, nationalism, progressivism, which saw the role of the state as the imposition of one moral vision on the entire society, characterized in terms of purity or progress or scientific socialism or some other kind of vision of society. The socialists and the progressive promised that they would achieve a higher freedom than was offered by merely bourgeois freedom, as they called it. Dismissed the idea of running your own life as bourgeois freedom, because they believed collective freedom would be the true freedom to create ourselves collectively and in conscious control of our collective future. So that collectivist vision of liberty was very powerful. People said, we will plan our future collectively and achieve a higher freedom. But it meant no freedom for minorities, for the people who would not fit the new model. They were going to create the new man. And trust me, the new man would not have same-sex attractions. They were very clear about that. Those people were expendable. And collectivism licensed the new rulers to exercise power to pursue whatever prejudices and hatreds they harbored in their hearts that were now validated by allegedly scientific theories, whether it was dialectical materialism or psychiatric progressivism, but always armed with the brutal power of state violence to enforce them. I'll turn back briefly in a moment to the re-emergence of mass persecution of gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgendered people. But first I want to explore for just a moment how classical liberal ideas and institutions created freedom for everyone. The move toward market relations that Smith observed and championed entailed greater role complexity for persons. Namely, you could create your social relations through choice. People could escape circumstances that they found unfavorable, and they could move to where they could live as they preferred. Life could be what the individual made of it. The legal historian Sir Henry Sumner Maine noted in 1861, the movement of the progressive societies has hitherto been a movement from status to contract, from how you were born into a caste or a class or a condition to what you choose. The emergence of wage labor, which the socialists attacked as exploitation, in fact liberated people, because increasing numbers of people were able to escape family production and go into urban life. And they were freed from the strictures of coerced marriage, which was used to secure the family's assets. So people now were free to marry or form relationships based on their choice, including not only security and economic opportunity, but love. The sociologist Barry Adams noted of the liberating impact of greater market freedom, quote, capitalism laid the groundwork for voluntary relationships based on personal preference, the precondition of romantic love. Capitalism did not cause romantic love, it allowed it to flourish. A friend of mine, a political scientist at University of Hawaii, who teaches comparative Asian study systems, Kate Zhao Zhou, in her very important book, China's Long March to Freedom, Grassroots Modernization, noted that it was free market capitalism that changed China's attitudes towards sexual minorities, who had been persecuted mercilessly by the party and the state. As she noted, quote, Chinese gay awakening has been a complex process combining the human desire for freedom with local and global resources. The availability of private sector housing resulting from China's growing wealth, private commercial services, mobility achieved by ignoring law, and globalization's provision of employment has laid the foundations for the emergence of gay culture. Migration, job mobility, commerce, and private housing are necessary conditions in developing countries for gay culture to emerge. In China, at least, no capitalism means no gay culture. And I recall very vividly, I was in Shanghai in 1997 with Professor Zhou and her husband, a very, very tall gentleman. And she came up to me with great excitement and she said, Tom, I have something marvelous to tell you. I said, what? She said, Shanghai is full of gay bars. And she had gone out with her husband all through the city looking for gay bars. And she found an abundance of them. They were on virtually every corner, it seemed. And she went in and she asked people, men and women that were in these bars, what had made the change from the time she lived in China. She's from Wuhan. And when she lived in China, gay people were publicly executed. And she said, what made the change? And at this time, homosexuality was still a punishable offense. The answer was uniform. The legalization of private ownership of homes. It was private property. Because before that time, the state allocated houses to couples who had to be married and had to be heterosexual couples. Otherwise, no apartment. And that left gay people in terrible circumstances, in addition to the murderous persecution that they experienced. I remember she said, one person said, when dealing with the state, they demanded you had to show you were married to someone of the other sex or you couldn't get an apartment. But now, with private landlords, and I quote her, they don't care if you are purple and have horns. If you pay the rent, they will let you live in the apartment. And that was the difference. In that same year, later, in 1997, homosexuality was formally decriminalized in the People's Republic of China and followed in 2001 by delisting it as a mental illness. Unfortunately, with the reassertion of Marxist ideology by Xi Jinping, gay people in China are again facing discrimination, subordination, and the possibility of active persecution. And Marxism as an ideology has shown itself once again to be a force for oppression and subjugation, as it was from the beginning. And that's no accident, because it was the collectivist progressives, so-called, in America and elsewhere, who created the first vice squads, the police units for the prosecution of vice, and purity laws, who established state-paid professional police forces that were now dedicated and equipped to persecute those who were committing what the rulers decided were vices. And it should come as no surprise that communists were especially avid in their desire to eliminate LGBT people, for in their minds the individual mattered for nothing. The individual was an epiphenomenon. Only the intersection of historical forces that were more real than the flesh and blood individual human being. Homosexuality was considered a bourgeois disease, and it was to be eliminated once and for all by the elimination of capitalism and, of course, by the elimination of the homosexuals themselves. I shudder every time I see a t-shirt or a poster with Alberto Corda's photo of the malevolent murderer Che Guevara, who oversaw the Cuban dictatorship's executions and firing squads, its imprisonment and enslavement of dissidents, religious minorities, LGBT people, and others, and the notorious Unidades Militares de Ayuda a la Producción, the military units to help production. These were slave labor camps. Guevara was a malevolent and violent man who killed his opponents and who proudly stood against individual freedom of all sorts and in favor of predatory violence. And those who wear that photo on their shirts almost never know the real legacy of the real human being. As they say, tengo una camisa del Che y no sé por qué. I have the Che t-shirt, but I don't know why. The fate of LGBT people in real, existing socialism, not to be confused with free market democracies, such as Denmark and Sweden and Norway, which are free market economic and social orders. But in real existing socialism, their fate was to be imprisoned or coercively recruited as prostitutes to entrap dissidents or foreign visitors, sent to forced labor, or executed. Socialism created injustice and oppression. But it was liberal capitalism that liberated us. So I hope that we will proudly celebrate the freedom of the market, not only for lifting the bulk of mankind out of poverty and ignorance into affluence and dignity, but for liberating sexual and other harmless minorities from injustice and oppression. I hope that people will join me in celebrating the obvious and simple system of natural liberty that was the cause upheld by the Stonewall resistance to violence, injustice, and oppression. We have those people to thank, and I would add an additional note. I learned over time to be very grateful to the most despised among them, the drag queens and others who had the courage to stand up and fight back when others did not. We have them and others around the world like them to thank for our freedom. So no more hiding, no more dissembling, no more invisibility. As it says in the Iliad, we will fight for our day of liberty. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you, Juan, for the translation into a much more beautiful language.
Si alguien quiere hacer una pregunta, no hay problema si no habláis inglés, porque bueno, podemos hacerle a Tom la traducción y...
Well, I would like to...
You want to do it in English and Spanish for everyone then?
He will do it in Spanish and then
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Bueno, en español primero, entonces, ¿no? Bueno, sí, quería preguntar sobre las leyes de sodomía que existían y creo que siguen existiendo en algunos estados de Estados Unidos. Has dicho que no afectaban a las mujeres, pero entiendo que depende de la práctica sexual, ¿no? O sea, que también afectaban las parejas. I would like to ask you about the sodomy laws that existed in the United States, or I think that there are some that exist today even? No, not any. That you said that it was not directed to women, but I guess they will be also be prosecuted if they even heterosexual couples if they made sodomy in their own house or I think no.
I should have been more precise.
Yeah.
I was talking about during the 19th century. There was no law against sexual relations between women. Also, similarly, in Britain, when it was first suggested, Queen Victoria said, "Why, that's impossible." And so they said, okay, they didn't. So only male homosexuality was illegal because she said, that's unthinkable. However, sodomy was then defined in statute law during the progressive period. So it comes later. And then it is defined as any crime against nature, some of which are very particular, and it's almost like reading a pornographic story to read the descriptions in the state statutes. They were almost never prosecuted against heterosexual people, almost never. And the obvious problem of prosecution is you need a witness. And the consequence was then the police would go undercover and try to solicit this, going to gay bars or other establishments.
They still do this for prostitution and things like that, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that has to stop.
Yeah.
But it was the nature of a victimless crime is a crime that has no complaining victim. And sodomy in the 19th century would not allow another party to be a complaining victim if it was voluntary. So if it was in a private home, it could not be a crime. It had to be in public or involuntary. That was changed during the progressive era and onward, where the state now would attempt to police these things and create advice squads to trap people. I hope that's a clear explanation.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep.
Bueno, sí, Tom explica que las leyes no aplicaban cuando se empezaron a aplicar, aplicaban solo a los hombres homosexuales, porque la reina Victoria pues pensó que era inconcebible que dos mujeres se acostasen y demás. Y que las leyes de sodomía también cambiaron, puesto que sí, teóricamente, como yo he preguntado, pues podían aplicarse a una pareja heterosexual que practicase estas. Pues el Estado pues no se metía en las casas, o no, siempre tenía, como he explicado antes, tenía que tener un testigo voluntario que ayudase a establecer, y entonces pues en las casas no era. Esto cambió con la reforma de progresista, ¿no? En el que pues la policía estableció trampas para atraer este tipo de comportamientos y tal. Y de hecho, bueno, he comentado, y siguen haciéndolo en casos de prostitución. De hecho, hoy en día es bastante común pues que las policías pues en Las Vegas o demás pues hagan pasar por prostitutas para detener clientes.
De hecho, en la progresía se crearon las brigadas del vicio, que llamaban.
Gracias. Hello, Tom. I will first make it in Spanish and then... yo lo que le quiero preguntar a Tom, estamos oyendo continuamente en España y en algunos otros países, sobre todo latinoamericanos, hablar del concepto de marxismo cultural, que se ha puesto muy de moda. Y el concepto de marxismo cultural, que teóricamente vendría, según los teóricos de esta idea, vendría de la Escuela de Frankfurt, que es una escuela de pensamiento económico de los años 30, 40, 50, absolutamente equivocada, totalmente socialdemócrata, pero que prácticamente no se ha metido en temas no económicos. Sin embargo, pues ahora tenemos a todo este movimiento un poco conservador, digamos, hablando del marxismo cultural, en el cual meten todo. Meten al feminismo, tanto al radical como incluso al liberal, meten la causa LGBT y meten bastantes otras cuestiones. Sin embargo, los países marxistas, como él ha explicado en su conferencia, tanto los pocos que quedan hoy en día, Vietnam, China, Laos, Corea del Norte, incluso Cuba, como los regímenes comunistas que ha habido durante los últimos 100 años, todos han sido brutalmente incluso contrarios a, por ejemplo, a la causa LGBT. Entonces, lo que le quiero preguntar es cómo ve esto él y por qué se habla de marxismo cultural cuando realmente de poderse llamar de alguna forma sería liberalismo cultural o libertarismo cultural más que marxismo cultural y si él sabe o tiene alguna idea de dónde ha surgido este término. No, I was explaining what I would like to ask you, Tom, is here in Spain and also in Latin America, over the past few years, there has been quite a movement to sort of denounce what they call cultural Marxism. It's mostly conservative-leaning people who talk about cultural Marxism, and they tend to believe that this is something coming from the Frankfurt School, which was an economic school, a social democratic economic school in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, Theodor Adorno and other thinkers, Erich Fromm, etc. And they claim that sort of there was some cabal of the socialists to sort of push for causes like the LGBT one and also feminist and other causes. But the reality is that in those countries where there has been actual Marxism, and even today in countries like China or Vietnam or North Korea, etc., Marxism has always been very anti-individual liberty for LGBT and other communities. So what is your take on this? Why is this cultural Marxism myth being propelled, and where does it all come from?
The term cultural Marxism myth is the correct term. There is no such thing. It's an invention by far-right ideologues to blame a whole raft of things they don't like on Marxism. Mm-hmm. They then say, well, it's the Frankfurt School. If they read Adorno, it's impossible to imagine this comes from the Frankfurt School, whatever it is. Adorno is writing on jazz music. He was one of the most unfun, unliberated people who ever lived. He wanted to ban jazz music because it was insufficiently socialist and too individualistic and so on. These people were extremely censorious characters. The idea that they were going to secretly undermine society to bring about communism is a fantasy, just a simple fantasy. Well, sometimes they say, well, we can trace it to Gramsci and the March to the Institutions. Gramsci also was not interested in feminism and gay liberation or those sorts of things. And his idea could be applied just as easily to any political movement. So there's nothing uniquely Marxist about it, in my opinion. Marcuse, who was a kind of a Frankfurt School Heideggerian Marxist in a way, he's connected to the Frankfurt School, but not like Habermas or others. Marcuse was in favor of dictatorship, but there's no evidence that he was in favor of any of the things that they call cultural Marxism. I think it is an ideological fantasy, an invention, to blame some group of communists for all the things they don't like in society, which includes lots of things I do like, and I am not a Marxist. I like the ability of people to choose their own partners in life, to choose their own life partners. I'm not a Marxist. You don't have to be a Marxist to think that. I'm in favor of decriminalizing drugs. I don't use any of them other than coffee and beer and wine. But I want to decriminalize them. It doesn't make me a Marxist. I'm not part of a Marxist conspiracy. And we could go down the list. So quite frankly, I think that the idea of so-called cultural Marxism has no roots in Marx, no serious roots in the so-called Frankfurt School. It can't even be traced to Gramsci. It's invented by neo-Nazi philosophers in Europe, like Alain de Benoist and others of this far-right neo-fascist variety. So it's disturbing sometimes when I hear people claiming to be liberals saying they're fighting against cultural Marxism, because I think they're adopting a construct from illiberal people. And we need to rethink this and say it doesn't make sense. I hope that makes sense. Could you repeat that?
Yes, I will repeat everything. No, por supuesto no puedo recordar todo, pero bueno, básicamente por resumirlo, sí, está de acuerdo en que la idea esta del marxismo cultural es un mito creado y propagado por sectores no liberales, no libertarios, por supuesto, sino sectores pues particularmente conservadores que de alguna manera pues han generado toda una fantasía tomando la escuela de Frankfurt. Él habla, por ejemplo, aparte de Adorno que mencioné yo, también él menciona a Marcuse y a otros pensadores que son pues claramente socialdemócratas, muy estatistas, extremadamente estatistas, que no se ocupan además de cuestiones de libertades civiles, básicamente hablan de economía y que al final pues bueno, lo que se ha creado es todo ese mito. Alguien antes, no sé si era Iván, me parece, o Adolfo, hablaba de Márquez y Laje, estos dos autores argentinos que están propagando esa misma idea del marxismo cultural. Y bueno, lo que dice Tom es que básicamente se trata de un movimiento para tratar de convertir a los ojos de la población en marxista todo aquello que a ellos no les gusta, tenga o no tenga nada que ver con el marxismo, ni con la escuela de Frankfurt, y le añade, ni tampoco con Gramsci, con el pensador italiano, porque dice que ninguno de los dos es el origen de todas estas ideas.
Exactamente.
You said that there were no sodomy laws today in the United States. That's not true. I think in 18 states it's still unlawful to engage in sodomy or even in oral sex with a heterosexual partner. It is just because of the Parkland, the Lawrence versus Parkland in 2003.
Lawrence v. Texas.
Lawrence versus Texas, yeah. Lawrence versus Texas, that nobody is prosecuted, but the laws are nominally still on the books.
They are struck down. They are no longer laws. Okay. So it could be that the state legislature did not repeal it, but under American constitutional law, they are not laws. So it's finished. There are no laws against that in the United States. There are lots of terrible laws in the United States, but that particular category were wiped out.
Mi pregunta era si, que según información en Internet, todavía en 18 estados está prohibido la sodomía o incluso el sexo oral entre adultos heterosexuales, y que desde 2003, en un caso Lawrence versus Texas, realmente es la base de que estas leyes, aunque siguen en los libros, no se persigan. Entonces responde Tom que gracias a se han declarado inconstitucionales y que entonces, aunque nominalmente no han sido derogadas, según las leyes americanas, son consideradas nulas.
Let me add one small point. The Cato Institute filed a very influential brief in that case, an amicus curiae, friend of the court brief. And I had the tiniest, smallest role of just proofreading it before it went to the court. And that case was cited, that brief, more than any other, and was very important in the majority opinion. They did not cite a right to privacy. They said it was a liberty right. And that was most important. It wasn't discrimination because of hetero or homo. They said that's not the issue. Some people said, well, it's not fair. You prosecute this one and not that one. And they said it's a liberty right that you have to live your life as you want. And that establishment in the majority opinion of the court was very important. And one of the few times liberty was mentioned in a court decision as a protected interest of citizens.
Bueno, básicamente ha dicho que en el juicio Lawrence contra Texas, ¿no? Que la justicia dictaminó que Porque podría haber dicho que se anulaba la ley o que no era constitucional por un tema de privacidad, pero sin embargo resultó que lo dijo por un tema de protección de la libertad y que es una de las pocas veces pues, que la justicia pues, ha tomado decisiones en Estados Unidos invocando la protección de la libertad en vez de otro tipo de... No, yo no entiendo.
Okay.
Yo quería preguntarle a Tom si también en Estados Unidos está ocurriendo lo que estamos viendo aquí con todo tipo de grupos y desgraciadamente también los colectivos LGBTI no se libran, o parte del colectivo LGBTI español, por ejemplo, no se libra de esta batalla por conseguir privilegios, es decir, no derechos objetivos derivados de la defensa de la libertad individual, a través de nuevas normativas que imponen obligaciones al resto de la población para con sus propios intereses, y de ahí la creación de una serie de lobbies que viven un poco al calor de los subsidios cargados a través de las arcas del Estado. So I wanted to ask you if in the United States happens things similar like in Spain with some of the LGBT community that now have kind of forgotten their objective to defend personal liberties and equal under the law, before law, or under the law, exactly, for everyone. And they are now using their movement to claim privileges and to impose on the rest of the civil society obligations, not only economics, but other kind of obligations. Is there a trend like that also in the United States, or is something more derived from subsidies system that we have here in the welfare state?
Well, one has to distinguish very carefully what our far-right critics say when they talk about cultural Marxism. They say, the gay people, the LGBT, they want that. And that's not true. Overwhelming majority want to just live their lives. There is a tiny minority, and I mean actually quite small, who are as intolerant as the right-wing opponents of personal freedom. And they want to punish churches and religious groups who don't agree with them. So when this issue came up, people had gone and sought out people to get them to make a wedding cake. There are several cases. Wedding photographer. And they sought people who said, my religion says I don't believe that a marriage can be between two people of the same gender. Okay, that's their view. But they found those people, asked them to do it, and then when they said, no, I won't, sued them. And in my opinion, this was unjust and counterproductive. There's no reason to wage war on other people. And I told people, I said, we won everything. The right to live your own lives, the right not to be discriminated in any public service, the right not to be discriminated in the army, and so on, the right to be married, the right to raise children. We won everything. But they want to wage war and punish people who don't agree. And I will not join them in that. I think that's wicked. It's unjust and it's immoral. Unfortunately, there's now a response from the right, the so-called religious freedom laws, to allow people to discriminate only against one category of people. So, LGBT people, only those. And not anyone else, not on the basis of religion or color or anything else, but they say only this, which is a puzzling response in the statute books, to say there's only one category of people that could be discriminated against. But what's even worse is they want to apply it to licensed professions. So doctors, ambulance workers would be able to say, oh, I'm sorry, I come to the car accident and I see that this person looks like a lesbian, I won't take them to the hospital. and I'll say it's my religious freedom. I don't think that's right. If it's a licensed profession and we, the customers, are forced to rely on their provision of an oligopoly, they can't discriminate. And I don't think that's unreasonable to insist on that. But if it's someone who bakes wedding cakes, and that person doesn't want to put congratulations on your wedding cake, go to another baker.
Yeah.
Right? It's just the easy solution. Don't choose the one you know is an evangelical Christian to punish them. It's just wrong. So yes, we are seeing this, and it is what is fueling this right-wing backlash, and Trumpismo is being fueled by this. And the bulk of lesbian and gay and bisexual people and transgender people don't want that. I'm convinced of that. But all it takes is two people to go to court.
Yeah.
And they create a court case. And this issue of culture war is one that we should declare peace. I don't want a culture war with other people. Just let's say we won the war of rights, and let's declare peace on culture. I hope that's clear.
Yes, that is. Resumiendo, porque bueno, hemos hablado mucho, también ahí se están dando casos, pero afortunadamente sigue siendo una minoría, no es tan extendido como aquí, que todavía pesan mucho una parte de la comunidad que quieren influenciar y crear privilegios, pero también ahí se han dado casos, y nos cuenta, por ejemplo, el famoso caso de la empresa de repostería que se negó a hacer la tarta porque eran evangelistas y que su religión no les permitía preparar una tarta para una pareja de homosexuales que se querían casar, y bueno, les llevó ante los tribunales, tratando un poco de que la ley forzara a que les hiciera la tarta. Entonces Tom no considera que eso es la mejor opción, y no defiende el que haya enfrentamiento entre diferentes grupos, sobre todo porque bueno, la comunidad LGBTI en Estados Unidos ha ganado todas sus libertades personales, y por otro lado lo ve como estratégicamente erróneo, porque está alimentando de alguna manera a los grupos extremistas de derechas y les permite decir, veis lo que están haciendo, tenemos que empezar a endurecer el discurso, sobre todo parte de los seguidores de Trump, y han llegado ya a niveles de incluso promover que se hagan normativas, sobre todo a nivel de licencias profesionales, donde se permita que los enfermeros, los empleados de las ambulancias, en base a su religión, a sus creencias, se puedan negar a atender a una persona si consideran que, según ellos, pues pueda ser una persona lesbiana o homosexual. O sea, se ha llegado a este tipo de extremos. Con lo cual, él aboga por la cultura del entendimiento y de la paz en vez del confrontamiento, y en eso, pues, evidentemente, los libertarios estamos unidos.
I would add one point. I don't think I would want to eat a cake baked by someone who didn't like me.
Exactly. Está haciendo hincapié en el hecho de que no le gustaría comerse una tarta hecha por alguien que realmente pues no le gustan las personas LGBTI. ¿Quién sabe lo que habrá puesto en la tarta? Así que... Juan Pina.
Well, that's one word.
Okay.
Surrogacy. What's your take? Sobre la gestación subrogada, ¿qué piensa?
Yeah, so it's a voluntary relationship, and if you respect the person's choices about, in this case, her own life, because obviously all the surrogates are female, we should respect it. I will mention, though, it's a somewhat more delicate issue than most contractual issues. It really has some complexity. So if I rent you my car and you drive around in my car, who is to say I shouldn't be able to do that? But renting a womb has additional complexities because she's going to carry the baby. And we should also recognize it's not shocking that a woman who carries a baby has natural affection. This is part of human biology, and we have to come to terms with that. And there have been some difficult cases where women have born children and not wanted to give them up. And that raises complexities. It's not the same as with the automobile. I rent you my car, and then when you're done, I want it back. A womb isn't quite like that. And I think that we have to have legal decisions in courts that are sensitive to these matters. But I don't believe a blanket ban is just to anybody. So the surrogacy question is also different from adoption issues, just because of this issue, that bearing a child creates relationships that the law should come to understand and show some willingness of judges to look at it. We have laws of equity in legal cases that are not decided just by an abstract principle of contract, as it would be in your automobile. But given that, I think it's grossly unjust what the Spanish government is doing, as I have understood, is just wrong. And to effectively exile people not able to come back with their children into the country is criminal. It's just criminal. And really vicious thing to do. So in that regard, I think that the law should not discriminate against the children, which is effectively what's being done. Allegedly, to protect women, they're punishing children. And I think that the politicians who do that should be ashamed of themselves, simply ashamed. We have a similar case, it's not a surrogacy case per se in the United States, where the Trump administration is showing how malevolent, how truly hateful they are. A same-sex couple who have 2 children have moved to the United States from Canada. One is a Canadian Israeli citizen, the other is a US citizen. The government did something they've never done before. So both of these children are legally the children of the 2 dads. They asked for a blood test. One baby is the biological child of one father. The other baby, they're born together, is the biological child of the Israeli father. That baby is being deported because they said, not a child of an American, although the legal child of the American citizen father. This has never been done before. It's not required in the law. There's no statute stating this at all. And they are doing this just to be evil. That's it. And of course to play to a very ugly, bigoted segment of the population. And this is, again, punishing a child, a baby, because they want to punish the adults. It's simply malevolent and evil. And I think I would say the same thing about what the Spanish government is doing to keep children out of the country. It's just wrong.
Bueno, responde Tom que por un lado, bueno, pues creo que como todos en esta sala probablemente la cuestión de la gestación subrogada es una cuestión contractual, una cuestión de libertad individual, de libertad de acuerdos entre las partes, aunque también manifiesta que, claro, que se trata de una cuestión contractual particularmente compleja porque, bueno, pues no es comparable tampoco el alquiler, digamos, de un útero al de un vehículo, por ejemplo, ¿no? Pero bueno, que al final, pese a todas las complejidades que tiene el asunto, pues es una cuestión de libertad individual entre las partes de ese contrato. Al mismo tiempo, añade, porque conoce el caso de las familias españolas que están en Ucrania y en Georgia con estos problemas terribles para poder regresar y condena la actuación del gobierno español en este caso de no permitir a estas familias regresar con sus bebés nacidos mediante gestación subrogada en esos países. Y por último pone como ejemplo también algo similar que ha pasado, no es exactamente de gestación subrogada, pero para que veamos un poco algo parecido que ha pasado en Estados Unidos, de cómo se están tratando de endurecer nuevamente este tipo de situaciones. Y es el caso de una pareja gay, compuesta por un canadiense y un israelí, que llegaron a Estados Unidos con sus 2 hijos, de los cuales uno es el padre biológico es el canadiense y el otro, el padre biológico, es el israelí. El canadiense tiene derecho a quedarse, el israelí lo están intentando deportar, cuando los 2 niños nacieron juntos mediante el mismo procedimiento, y sin embargo al hijo del padre israelí, pese a ser la pareja del canadiense, pues no le dejan y quieren deportar al niño pequeño. Y eso es algo pues parecido de alguna manera o comparable a lo que el gobierno español está haciendo con las familias que están en Ucrania y en Georgia.
I want to correct. One father was American.
Not Canadian?
No, they live in Canada.
They lived
moved to
okay.
America.
No.
One is American, one is
The other one is
Israeli.
Israeli. No, uno de los padres era americano y el otro israelí, y habían vivido en Canadá. Entonces, claro, como le pidieron una prueba de ADN y como uno de los bebés resultó que genéticamente era hijo del israelí, pues quieren deportarle. Mientras que al otro, por ser genéticamente ADN hijo del americano, pues le dejaban quedarse, cuando es la misma unidad familiar, ¿no? Ok, yo no sé si hay alguna cuestión más.
¿Alguien más quiere preguntar?
Un poco mal, pero bueno, 5 minutos más y que hay. ¿Quién estaba primero?
It's working.
No, que yo no.
Okay.
Que yo no quería hablar, que había visto a.
Entonces pásame la persona. Se lo paso a Iván.
Okay.
Yo
continuing with the subject of adoption. Sometime, probably months ago, a judge in Kentucky, Mitchell Nance or something similar, declared that he will not even accept any submission for adoption from gay parents, and he stated that adoption is a right of the children, not a right of the people who adopt. Can you please elaborate on this subject?
In Spanish again, please.
Sí, estaba comentando que recientemente un juez en los Estados Unidos, en Kentucky, Mitchell Nance, tomó la decisión de no admitir ninguna solicitud de adopción por parte de parejas homosexuales, alegando que el derecho de la adopción es un derecho de los niños, no un derecho de la pareja que adopta.
So I don't know any details of this particular case, but one thing is if a judge were to do that, he could be censored. I don't know if this presumably is a state judge, but you could go to another judge. So that would be one option. There was a case in Kentucky of a clerk of a county who said, I will not issue marriage certificates to same-gender couples. And she became a cause celeb, as they say, a celebrated cause, by the right-wing bigots, and they said it was her religious freedom. You cannot force her. She was finally told, you will do this or you will lose your job. If you're the clerk and you say, I won't issue a driver's license to Jews because I don't like Jews, you can't be a clerk anymore. That's the job to do. And so a movement was created, and Trump and others supported this, to say her religious freedom was being violated. But it was very clear, and all the rational people said, no, it's a requirement of the job. You cannot discriminate in this case. I would suspect a similar thing would be said to this judge, that it's not up to him to decide he won't allow children to be adopted by Jews or Muslims or atheists or any other group. And so I would not expect a decision like that to stay in this policy. And if it's a state level judge, you could go around him quite easily. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Sí, bueno, básicamente lo que ha dicho es que él no conocía el caso particular de este juez, pero sí conocía el caso de un oficial de la administración del Estado que se negaba a emitir las licencias matrimoniales para personas homosexuales. Y finalmente se le dijo que eso era parte de su trabajo y que si no lo hacía, pues iba a perder su empleo. Y que probablemente en el caso del juez, si una persona se encontraba en esa situación, fácilmente podía encontrar a otro juez que sí admitiera la solicitud y que no le extrañaría que ese juez recibiera el mismo tratamiento que recibió el oficial que no emitía las licencias matrimoniales. By the way, this judge had to resign his position, and there is a disciplinary court or something
That's
like
what
that in the judges.
I would expect that.
That decided at the end that they could not punish anymore the judge because he has already resigned, but if he were not resigned, he were being expelled from the judge position.
Well, at the end of mine, I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank you from my heart for working for the freedom of everyone. And it's not a cause that is just one segment of the population. To be a libertarian is to believe in the freedom of other people. That's the key. Joaquim Nabuco, my hero from Brazil, who struggled for freedom, he said, educate yourself and educate your children in the love of the freedom of other people. Only then will you appreciate your own. And I think that is what this movement in Spain is doing. So thank you and my respect.